The envelope arrived on my father's desk exactly 10 years after he'd thrown us out unmarked. Expensive, containing a single photograph of him and his secretary in a position that would end his marriage, his career, and everything he built on the ashes of our family. I'd spent a decade planning this moment, cultivating every connection, manipulating every variable, waiting for the precise instant when his destruction would be most complete. Revenge, I've learned, isn't a dish best served cold, it's best served. When your enemy has forgotten he ever wronged you, when he's comfortable and complacent, when he has everything to lose. I was 16 when Richard Castellano, I stopped calling him Dad. That night threw my mother and me onto the street with nothing but the clothes we were wearing and 2 hastily packed suitcases. The accusation had been swift and brutal. My mother was having an affair with his business partner, Marcus Chun. It didn't matter that she denied it, tears streaming down her face as she begged him to listen. It didn't matter that I screamed and pleaded, showing him the calendar that proved Mom had been home every night that month, that there was no possible way she could have been where he claimed. Richard Castellano had made up his mind, and when my father made up his mind, the universe bent to accommodate him, or so he thought. "You have 1 hour," he'd said, his voice ice cold in the foyer of the house where I'd grown up. "Take what you can carry. Everything else stays. The accounts are frozen. The credit cards are canceled. You'll get nothing from me, not a cent, not a reference, nothing. You're both dead to me." My mother had collapsed against the marble staircase, but I'd stood there, staring at this man who taught me to ride a bike, who'd helped me with calculus homework, who told me I could be anything I wanted to be. In that moment, something fundamental shifted inside me. The girl who'd believed in fairness and justice and the basic decency of people, especially the people who were supposed to love you, that girl died right there in the foyer. The girl who replaced her was made of sharper stuff. We found out the truth 3 months later when we were living in a roach-infested studio apartment in the worst part of the city. When my mother was working double shifts at a diner and I was juggling school with a job at a grocery store. Marcus. Chen reached out through a mutual friend, desperate to explain. There had been no affair. Richard had discovered that Marcus had found irregularities in the company's books, evidence that Richard had been embezzling from their clients for years. Rather than face exposure, Richard had manufactured the affair. Story complete with photoshopped images and fabricated hotel receipts. He'd used it to force Marcus out of the company, to isolate my mother so thoroughly that no one would believe her if she tried to defend herself, to ensure that if Marcus ever tried to blow the whistle, it would look like revenge from a scorned affair partner. My father hadn't thrown us out because he believed my mother had betrayed him. He'd thrown us out because we were liabilities, loose ends, potential obstacles to his carefully constructed empire of lies that my mother never recovered, the woman who'd been vivacious and warm, who'd volunteered at homeless shelters and organized neighborhood block parties, who'd believed the best of everyone. She shrank into herself. Depression took root like a cancer. 2 years after we were exiled, she took a bottle of sleeping pills and didn't wake up. The note she left was simple. "I'm too tired to keep fighting, baby. I'm sorry. Be stronger than I was." I was 18, alone, and I made a promise over her grave. Richard Castellano would pay for every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of suffering he'd caused. But I wouldn't rush it. I wouldn't be sloppy. I would be patient, methodical, and absolutely ruthless. The first step was education. I'd gotten a full scholarship to college. My grades had remained perfect even through everything, driven by a fury that never let me rest. I studied business and psychology, learning how men like my father thought, how they operated, what they valued. I graduated summa cum laude and immediately enrolled in law school, again on scholarship. I needed to understand the systems he used to protect himself, the loopholes he exploited, the legal frameworks that made men like him untouchable. During those years, I watched him from a distance. I tracked his social media, his business announcements, his public appearances. He'd married again within a year of divorcing my mother, a woman named Clarissa, 20 years his junior, blonde and vapid, and perfectly content to be a trophy wife. They had a son, Brandon, whom my father paraded around like a prize. The perfect replacement family for the defective one he'd discarded. I cultivated invisibility. I'd changed my appearance, dyed my dark hair platinum, wore colored contacts to change my brown eyes to blue, dressed in a completely different style. I'd even legally changed my name to Maya Thornton, using my mother's maiden name. When I occasionally crossed paths with people from my old life, they looked right through me. I was a ghost, which was exactly what I needed to be. After law school, I joined a boutique firm that specialized in corporate litigation. I was brilliant at it all. That rage had to go somewhere, and I channeled it into destroying opposing counsel in the courtroom. Within 3 years, I'd made partner. Within 5, I'd left to start my own firm, taking half their client list with me. I became known as the lawyer you called when you absolutely, positively had to win, regardless of how dirty your opponent was willing to fight Dot. And all the while, I was building the trap. Step 1 had been befriending Clarissa's sister, Diane, who despised my father and the way he treated her sister like a beautiful accessory. That friendship, carefully cultivated over years, gave me access to the family's private dynamics, their schedules, their vulnerabilities. Step 2 was hiring a private investigator to document every one of my father's indiscretions, and there were many. Richard Castellano hadn't changed. He'd just gotten better at hiding his tracks. Or so he thought. Step 3 was the masterpiece. I orchestrated my own hiring as the attorney for Maxwell Industries, one of Richard's biggest clients, the CEO. James Maxwell never knew that I'd spent months researching his company, identifying a problem with their current legal team, and positioning myself as the perfect solution. Once I was inside, I had legitimate access to all the contracts between Maxwell Industries and Castellano Enterprises, the irregularities Marcus had discovered a decade ago. They'd never stopped. If anything, my father had become more brazen. Overbilling, misappropriated funds, fraudulent expense reports, it was all there, hidden in layers of complex transactions that would look legitimate to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for fraud. I documented everything. I built a case, so airtight that a first-year law student could prosecute it. And then I waited for the perfect moment. That moment came on Brandon's 18th birthday. Richard was throwing an elaborate party at the country club. 500 guests, a who's who of the city's elite. He was celebrating not just his son's birthday, but the announcement of Brandon's acceptance to Harvard, my father's alma mater. The school I would have attended if he hadn't destroyed my life. The irony was delicious. The envelope I mentioned at the beginning, that was just the appetizer. I'd spent months cultivating a relationship with Vivian, my father's current secretary, a relationship that was entirely consensual on her part and completely strategic on mine. Vivian was smart, ambitious, and tired of being underestimated and underpaid. She was also, conveniently, willing to sleep with my father once I'd planted the idea in her head that it might accelerate her career advancement. My father, predictable as always, took the bait. The photographs I had were real, unretouched, and damning, but I didn't send them to my father. That would have been too simple, too clean. I sent them to Clarissa. The envelope arrived at the country club during the party, delivered by a courier, directly to Clarissa's hands as she stood beside my father, smiling for photos with their perfect son. I watched from across the room. I'd been invited as James Maxwell's attorney. Just another face in the crowd as she opened it, as the color drained from her face. As she turned to look at my father with an expression of such absolute betrayal that I felt the first crack in the ice around my heart. She didn't make a scene. Clarissa was too well-bred for that. She simply excused herself, and I watched as my father, confused, followed her out of the ballroom. That was phase 1. Phase 2 happened 30 minutes later when the district attorney, a woman named Patricia Chun, Marcus's niece, who I'd been carefully befriending for 3 years, arrived at the party with 2 detectives. She found my father in a side room, trying to calm a hysterical Clarissa, and served him with a warrant for his arrest on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and wire fraud. I tipped Patricia off to the evidence 3 days earlier, giving her enough time to review it, verify it, and build her own case. I'd also provided her with additional evidence of my father's role in destroying Marcus's reputation, evidence that would form the basis for a civil suit. Marcus was preparing to file. The timing was perfect. The party was full of witnesses, including reporters who'd been invited to cover the social event of the season. By the time the police led my father out in handcuffs, there were cameras everywhere. The photos would be on the front page of every newspaper in the city by morning, but I still wasn't done. Phase 3 involved Diane, Clarissa's sister, who I'd carefully positioned as a confidant and friend over the years. The day after my father's arrest, Diane helped Clarissa file for divorce and obtain an emergency restraining order. More importantly, Diane had been keeping detailed records of my father's emotional abuse, the cutting comments, the way he controlled Clarissa's access to money, the affairs he'd barely bothered to hide. All of it became part of the divorce filing, along with a demand for full custody of Brandon and a significant portion of my father's assets. Meanwhile, James Maxwell, who'd been genuinely horrified to discover he'd been defrauded by a trusted partner, was pursuing his own civil suit, one that would likely bankrupt Castellano Enterprises, even if my father somehow avoided prison. I'd made sure of it, carefully guiding James's legal team toward the most aggressive possible strategy. And the final phase? That was personal. 10 days after my father's arrest, I visited him in jail. I'd arranged it through official channels. I was a lawyer, after all, and I claimed I was representing a potential witness in his case. The guards led me to a private meeting room, and I waited, my heart pounding in a way it hadn't during any of the previous steps. When they brought him in, I almost didn't recognize him. The Richard Castellano I remembered, arrogant, powerful, immaculately groomed, had been replaced by a haggard man in an orange jumpsuit, his hair greasy, his eyes haunted. He looked at me without recognition, which made sense. Maya Thornton, successful attorney, bore no resemblance to the 16-year-old Maya Castellano he'd thrown away like garbage. "Mr. Castellano," I said, my voice professionally neutral. "I'm Maya Thornton. I'm here to discuss your case." He slumped into the chair across from me. "Are you from the public defender's office?" "Because I have my own attorney. I'm not here as your attorney," I interrupted. "I'm here to deliver a message." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a photograph, not the ones of him and Vivian, but an old one from before. It showed the 3 of us, my father, my mother, and me, taken at my 16th birthday party just 3 months before everything fell apart. We looked happy. We looked like a family. I placed it on the table between us and watched as recognition finally flickered in his eyes. "Maya?" He whispered, and for the first time in 10 years, someone called me by my real name. "Hello, Richard," I said, and I smiled. "Did you really think I wouldn't remember? Did you think I would just disappear? That there would be no consequences for what you did?" His face went through a remarkable journey: shock, confusion, fear, and finally, the beginning of understanding. You did this?" "Every single bit of it," I confirmed. The evidence against you? I compiled it. Your arrest. I arranged it. Your wife leaving you? I orchestrated that too. Your business falling apart? My doing. Your reputation destroyed? My masterpiece. And your son, Brandon, he's 18 now, old enough to hear the truth about what you did to his half-sister and her mother. Diane's going to make sure he knows everything. Richard's hands were shaking. Your mother. The affair wasn't real. I know that now. I was wrong, Maya. I was protecting the business, protecting our future. Our future? I laughed, and it was a harsh, ugly sound. You threw me away, Richard. You threw both of us away to cover up your crimes. And my mother? She killed herself because of what you did to her. She died believing she was worthless, that she deserved what you did to us. So don't talk to me about our future. You destroyed that future the night you called us liars and put us on the street. I'm sorry, he said, and tears were actually running down his face. God, Maya, I'm so sorry. If I could take it back, but you can't, I said, standing up. And that's the point. You can't take it back. You can't fix it. You can't make it right. All you can do is live with the consequences. And those consequences are going to be severe. You're looking at 15 to 20 years in prison, Richard. You're going to lose everything, your money, your house, your wife, your son, your reputation, your freedom. Everything you valued more than your own daughter. I picked up the photograph and put it back in my briefcase. I wanted you to know it was me. I wanted you to understand that every single disaster that's befallen you in the past 2 weeks, that's all going to continue to befall you for years to come. That's not random chance or bad luck. That's justice. That's what happens when you underestimate the people you hurt. Please, he begged. Maya, please. I'll do anything. I'll confess. I'll make it right. I'll tell everyone what I did to you and your mother. Oh, you'll do that anyway, I said. Patricia Chen is very thorough. The truth about what you did to Marcus, about the fake affair, about throwing out your wife and daughter to cover your crimes, that's all going to come out in discovery. But it won't be because you chose to confess. It'll be because you have no choice. I walked to the door, then paused and looked back at him. You know what the worst part is, Richard? If you just loved us, if you'd just been a decent father and husband, none of this would have happened. You could have confessed to Marcus, taken your lumps, maybe done a little time. You would have lost some money, some reputation, but you would have had your family. You would have had people who loved you, who stood by you. Instead, you chose to destroy us to save yourself, and in doing so, you created the one person in the world who would dedicate a decade to destroying you in return. I loved you, he whispered. I did love you, Maya. No, I said. You loved the idea of me. You loved having a daughter who made you look good. But you never loved me enough to choose me over your ego and your money. And that's why you're here, and I'm not. I knocked on the door, and the guard opened it. Before I left, I had one more thing to say. Mom's last words were, be stronger than I was, so I was. I became exactly strong enough to do this. I hope it was worth it, Richard. I hope whatever you gained from betraying us was worth everything you're about to lose. I walked out and didn't look back, in the weeks and months that followed. Everything unfolded exactly as I'd planned. Richard was convicted on multiple counts of fraud and sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. Clarissa divorced him and got everything, the house, the money, full custody of Brandon. Maxwell Industries won a civil judgment that bankrupted Castellano Enterprises. Marcus Chen's lawsuit resulted in a public acknowledgement of what Richard had done to him and a settlement that restored his reputation and Brandon. Diane made sure he learned the whole truth. He visited me once, this boy who was technically my half-brother, but who I'd never known. He looked like Richard, but there was something softer in his eyes. Something that made me think maybe he turned out differently. I don't know what to say to you, he told me. What he did? I can't imagine. You don't have to say anything, I replied. This was never about you. Was it worth it? He asked, all of this. Does it make you feel better? I thought about that question for a long time. Did it feel good to watch my father lose everything, to see him broken and imprisoned, to know that I'd orchestrated every moment of his downfall? Yes. Did it bring my mother back? No. Did it erase the trauma of what we'd been through? No. Did it fill the hole inside me that had been there since I was 16? Not completely, but it did give me something valuable. Closure. The knowledge that monsters don't get to win simply because they're powerful. The certainty that even when the system fails, even when justice seems impossible, patience and planning and sheer determination can balance the scales. It wasn't about feeling better, I finally told Brandon. It was about making sure he couldn't do it to anyone else. It was about showing him that actions have consequences, even when you think you're untouchable. And yes, there's satisfaction in that. That was 3 years ago now. Richard is still in prison and will be for a long time. I still practice law, still fight for people who've been wronged by those more powerful than them. I channel that same fury that drove my revenge into making sure other people get their justice, too. Sometimes I wonder who I might have become if my father hadn't thrown us out that night. Would I have been kinder, softer, more trusting? Would I have been a different kind of lawyer, or maybe not a lawyer at all? Would my mother still be alive? But then I remember that the girl I was died in that foyer 10 years ago. The woman I became was forged in the aftermath of that betrayal, tempered by loss and honed by determination. I don't know if I like her, this hard, calculating, ruthless version of myself, but I respect her. She survived. She fought back. She won Dot, and on the days when I doubt whether revenge was the right path, I visit my mother's grave and remember why I started down this road in the first place. Not for me, but for her. For the woman who died believing she was worthless, who never got to see her oppressor face consequences. The perfect revenge isn't just about destruction. It's about restoration, restoring the balance, restoring the truth, restoring dignity to those who were denied at Dot. My father tried to erase us from his life, to write us out of his story as if we'd never existed. But in the end, I became not that he lost everything, but that he'll be remembered for exactly what he was. The truth is permanent now, carved into public record, impossible to deny or rewrite. Sometimes revenge isn't about making yourself feel better. Sometimes it's about making sure the truth is told, the scales are balanced, and the people hurt you understand really, truly understand what they've done. And sometimes that's enough.